I never expected to inherit anything. Not because my family was poor. On the contrary, my grandfather had built a small fortune over his lifetime, but because I had long accepted that I was the invisible daughter. My parents doted on my sister Clara, the golden child, the one who could do no wrong even when she clearly did. I, on the other hand, was the quiet, responsible one, the one who never made a fuss, never demanded attention. When my grandfather passed away, I grieved deeply. He was the only one in my family who truly saw me, who actually listened. So when the will was read and nothing was left to me, I wasn't surprised. Hurt, yes, but not surprised. What did surprise me was what I found out a year later, completely by accident. It started with a chance encounter at a bank. I was dealing with some routine paperwork when an older woman, a lawyer who had worked with my grandfather, recognized my last name. "Strange that you never claimed your share," she said casually. My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" I asked, heart pounding. That's when she told me. My grandfather had left me something significant. But according to the records, I had never responded to the notification. I felt cold all over. I had never received any notification. My parents, the same ones who had always put Clara first, had hidden it from me. And that's when I knew. I wasn't going to let this go. But I wasn't going to confront them either. No. I was going to make them regret underestimating me. I didn't react right away. Instead, I smiled politely, thanked the lawyer, and walked out of the bank like nothing had happened. But inside, I was shaking. My mind raced with possibilities, questions, anger. How much had my grandfather left me? And why had my parents hidden it? I had always known they favored Clara, but this was something else entirely. This wasn't just neglect. This was theft. I spent the next few weeks quietly digging. I requested records, searched for old legal documents, and even visited the lawyer's office under the guise of clarifying things. And that's when I saw it, a copy of the original will. My grandfather had left me a property, a valuable one, a house in a prime location, fully paid off. My name was right there, printed in legal ink. The only problem? My parents had never told me. They had intercepted the documents, ignored the legal notifications, and somehow manipulated things so that everything went to Clara instead. I could have confronted them right then. I could have stormed into their house, waved the papers in their faces, demanded an explanation. But I knew them too well. My parents were experts at twisting reality, at making me feel crazy for demanding basic fairness. They'd tell me I was being ungrateful, selfish, that I didn't need the house the way Clara did. No, a confrontation wouldn't get me justice. It would only give them a chance to cover their tracks. So instead, I decided to play the long game. If they had stolen from me, I would make sure they lost more than they ever intended. Quietly, carefully, I set my plan into motion. The first thing I needed was proof. Undeniable, legally binding proof. I didn't just want to expose what they had done, I wanted to make sure they had no way out. So I started small. I reached out to the lawyer again, this time with more direct questions. Could a will be executed without all beneficiaries being notified? Could assets be transferred without the rightful owner's knowledge? The answers were exactly what I expected. No, and absolutely not. My parents had committed fraud, plain and simple. Armed with this knowledge, I started gathering every piece of documentation I could. Bank statements, emails, even a few handwritten notes I managed to borrow from my parents' office when I visited. I was careful, meticulous. I knew that if they caught wind of what I was doing, they would find a way to erase the evidence. While I built my case, I also started working on something else, making them comfortable. I played the role of the naive daughter, the one who had no clue about what they had done. I even started visiting more often, asking about my grandfather, pretending to be sentimental. I wanted them to think they had gotten away with it. And it worked. My mother, especially, loved to gloat in subtle ways. She would mention how unfortunate it was that I hadn't inherited anything, how lucky Clara was to have such a good home. I smiled and nodded, biting my tongue. Let them believe I was still in the dark. The more confident they were, the more reckless they would become. And they did. I waited until tax season. My parents had always been meticulous about their finances, but with Clara's new house in the mix, I suspected there would be irregularities. And I was right. A few discreet searches led me to an interesting discovery. Property taxes were still being paid under my grandfather's estate, not Clara's name. That meant the house hadn't been legally transferred yet. It was still mine. Legally, they had committed fraud by withholding the inheritance from me, but now, they were also sitting on an asset they couldn't properly claim. If I played this right, I could make sure they paid for their greed in more ways than one. The next step was crucial. I filed a formal petition to contest the will, attaching the proof I had collected, copies of my grandfather's original testament, records of the ignored legal notifications, and a detailed account of my parents' actions. I didn't tell anyone. I let the legal system do the work quietly. But I wasn't done yet. I wanted them to feel the weight of what they had done before they even realized they were losing. So I planted a little seed of doubt. During a family dinner, I casually mentioned how I had been looking into estate laws. My mother's face twitched for a fraction of a second, and my father's grip tightened on his fork. Just enough of a reaction to tell me they were nervous. Perfect. Let them wonder. Let them panic. The cracks started to show almost immediately. My mother, usually composed, started making little comments, testing the waters, trying to gauge how much I knew. "You know, your grandfather wanted to be fair," she said one afternoon, stirring her tea a little too aggressively. "But Clara was struggling more than you. It made sense." I just nodded, pretending to agree. But I could see it now. She wasn't just justifying their actions. She was trying to convince herself that what they did wasn't wrong. That was good. Guilt made people sloppy. Then, the first real blow hit. A formal letter arrived at my parents' house, informing them of the legal dispute over the estate. My father called me that evening, his voice controlled but tight. "Why are you stirring up old wounds?" he asked. I played dumb. "What do you mean?" I could almost hear his teeth grinding over the phone. "The will? The house? What are you trying to do?" That was my confirmation. They knew they were caught, but instead of backing down, they tried to manipulate me. My mother called next, softer, playing the concerned parent. "We didn't want to tell you because we knew it would just hurt you," she said. "Clara needed it more than you did. We thought you'd understand." I almost laughed at the audacity. They had stolen from me and were now trying to paint it as an act of kindness. But I didn't take the bait. I kept my voice light, my words careful. "I get it," I said. "You were looking out for Clara, but I guess the court will decide what's fair now." Silence. That was the moment they realized I wasn't going to be guilt-tripped out of this. My mother's voice lost its softness. "Do you really want to put the family through this?" she asked, dropping the act entirely. I almost admired how quickly she could turn from sweet to venomous. But I had already made my decision. The legal proceedings moved forward, and soon enough, things started getting messy. For them. The moment my claim became official, Clara's name on the property was called into question. The bank, seeing the dispute, froze any refinancing options, meaning Clara couldn't access the house's equity. On top of that, my parents found themselves under investigation for their role in manipulating the will. They had assumed no one would question them. They had been so sure of their control over me that they never even considered I would fight back. Now, the very thing they stole was slipping through their fingers, and I hadn't even had to raise my voice once. The fallout was even better than I had planned. Once the case went to court, my parents scrambled to explain themselves. Their defense was laughable. They insisted it was a misunderstanding, that they had meant to tell me, but time got away from them. The judge didn't buy it. The evidence was too damning. Legal notifications sent to my name but intercepted, signatures that weren't mine. The fact that the property taxes were still being paid from my grandfather's estate rather than Clara's personal funds. One by one, the lies unraveled. But the best part? Clara wasn't innocent in all this either. She had known. Maybe not every detail, but she had been aware enough to go along with it. She had moved into my house, knowing it was never rightfully hers. And now, with the dispute public and the house tied up in legal limbo, she was stuck. She had spent the last year renovating it, sinking her money into her future. Now she couldn't sell it, she couldn't take out loans against it, and worst of all, she had no backup plan. My parents had protected her for so long that she had never learned how to stand on her own, and I wasn't about to bail her out. The next few months were a slow, satisfying unraveling. My parents, once so confident in their deception, were now desperate. Legal fees piled up, their carefully balanced finances stretched thin. Clara, for the first time in her life, had to deal with the consequences of something she had benefited from. She tried to call me, multiple times actually. At first it was the usual guilt-tripping. "We're sisters," she said in a voicemail. "We're supposed to support each other." But I didn't owe her anything, and she knew that. When guilt didn't work, she turned to anger. The last message she sent me was a long, furious rant about how I had ruined her life, how she had poured everything into that house, and now she had nothing. I didn't respond. What was there to say? I hadn't stolen from her. She had stolen from me. I had simply taken back what was mine. And that's exactly what I did. After months of legal back and forth, the final verdict came in my favor. The house was officially transferred to me, and my parents were forced to pay restitution for the financial damage they had caused. It wasn't enough to bankrupt them, but it was enough to hurt. And that was enough for me. The day I officially got the house back, I didn't celebrate. Not in a loud, triumphant way, at least. I simply drove to the property, walked through the front door, and stood in the middle of what was supposed to be mine all along. Clara had left in a hurry. There were still a few pieces of furniture, some half-packed boxes, and a single wine glass on the counter. For a brief moment, I felt a flicker of something, pity, maybe. But it passed quickly. She had made her choices, so had my parents, and now they had to live with the consequences. I didn't sell the house, at least not right away. Instead, I did something better. I rented it out. And the money? It went straight into an account with my name on it, the kind of financial security my parents had tried to deny me. Meanwhile, they struggled. My father had to take an early retirement to cover the legal fees. My mother, once the proud orchestrator of the family's affairs, lost her social standing when the story got out. Clara? She ended up moving back in with them, drowning in debt. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that she still blamed me for everything. That was fine. She could think whatever she wanted, because at the end of the day, I had won. And not just the house. I had won me, my independence, my power, my right to take up space in a family that had tried to erase me. They had stolen from me, lied to me, and underestimated me. But in the end, they had only played themselves. And the best part? I never had to scream, fight, or beg. I simply let the truth and the law do what they were supposed to. They thought they could erase my name from my grandfather's will. Instead, I erased them from my life.